Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up, should Idaho put a definition of marriage in its constitution? You'll get to decide in the ballot booth, and we'll talk about it next on Dialogue. Stay tuned.
Marriage is a God-given divine institution. Traditional marriage is the most important part of our society. It is the core of the family and the stability of all other social relationships.
It has nothing to do with gender. It has everything to do with love and fidelity and a strength of commitment to the promises we made. We keep our union sacred, no one else.
Good evening and welcome to a special one-hour edition of Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. A welcome as well to those of you listening on public radio. You were just listening to equally passionate testimony from people who disagree with each other on House Joint Resolution 2. That's a proposed constitutional amendment to define marriage as being only between a man and a woman. Now, Idaho is one of 8 states this election season with similar amendments on their ballots, and 20 states already have some form of that definition in their constitution. When you go into the ballot booth, here is the question you will see. Shall Article 3 of the Constitution of the State of Idaho be amended by the addition of a new Section 28 to provide that a marriage between a man and a woman is the only domestic legal union that shall be valid or recognized in this state? Idaho already has 2 statutes on the books defining marriage as being between a man and a woman, but proponents of a constitutional amendment say it's needed to make sure those laws aren't challenged and overturned in court. It's much harder to repeal part of a constitution. Opponents say the language in the amendment is vague and goes much further than other states' amendments by outlawing all domestic unions and will prevent them from ever petitioning the government for certain benefits. Now, we have a full contingent of guests to discuss this issue and take your phone calls on our toll-free line, 1-800-973-9800. But first, let's look at a piece on the subject by Ton Tan of KBCI-TV in Boise.
Sarah Seidel and Kim Beswick love being parents to 3-year-old Nick and 9-month-old Kate.
We're like any couple, and our experiences is that universal experience. I mean, kids bring amazing things into your life. They show you the world through different eyes.
Can you say hi? They're worried HJR 2 goes too far and takes rights away from same-sex and unmarried couples.
For us, you know, our kids could lose a parent, they could lose the house they live in because of the taxation laws, and they could lose the only other person that's been with them in their life. And, you know, I think that's the worry. I mean, and that's the real impact of HJR 2. It's what happens when tragedy strikes. It's what happens when someone loses a job, or someone goes to the hospital, or somebody dies. That's where our family is left vulnerable.
If something were to happen to one of us, we carry around the documents in our glove box of our cars. If we travel, we take them with us. And if something were to happen, you'd have to go into the hospital, show everything, and hope that they would be honored.
We are mailing out to a lot of...
But Brian Fisher of the Idaho Values Alliance says they won't lose those rights if HJR 2 passes. He says this measure prevents judges from ever attempting to allow gay marriage in Idaho.
So judges come and judges go, but the Constitution endures.
Fisher says he believes families are the cornerstone of a healthy society, and that's why families like this one should not be legally recognized.
There you go. Nice job.
Dads have something unique to contribute to the lives of children, and moms have something unique and irreplaceable. And so we want to do everything in our power to preserve the best and optimal nurturing environment for children.
No, it's not important.
Sarah and Kim disagree.
We are nurturing them, and they're beautiful, well-adjusted kids.
They've accepted the fact they can't marry, but they still hope.
But there's this great middle ground that we're ruling out, and that's where we can all come together and see that, you know, we're a family like any other family, and that there's some basic protections that make sense.
And welcome back to a special hour-long edition of Dialogue examining HJR 2, the proposed constitutional amendment on the ballot defining marriage. And that was a piece by Ton Tan of KBCI-TV of Boise, and we thank them for that. Do you have a question or comment about this subject? Call us toll-free at 1-800-973-9800. Now let me introduce my guests. First is Representative Lawrence Denny. Representative Denny is a Republican from Midvale and is the current Majority Leader in the House. Welcome.
Thank you.
He was one of the sponsors of the proposed amendment. Next is Brian Fisher. Mr. Fisher is the director of the Idaho Values Alliance, which supports HJR 2. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Marcia. Good to be here.
We also have two opponents of the legislation with us. Jim East and Kim Beswick are both with Idaho Votes No, the main group opposing HJR 2. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And Representative Denny, I'm going to start with you. You were one of the people who voted to put this on the ballot, so I start with you. And I want to put on the screen the two current statutes that Idaho has that deal with this subject. First is Idaho Code 32201, which says marriage is a personal relation arising out of a civil contract between a man and a woman. And then the next, 32209, marriages that violate the public policy of this state include but are not limited to same-sex marriages and marriages entered into under the laws of another state or country with the intent to evade the prohibitions of the marriage laws of this state. These are the laws that are already on the books.
Right.
Many have said, why do we need a constitutional amendment on top of these laws, which seem pretty directly drawn?
Well, you know, I think probably the best answer to that is found in the recent court decision in New Jersey, where New Jersey, who has a similar law to ours, was challenged in the trial court and upheld. They were challenged again in the appeals court and upheld, and finally in the Supreme Court on I think it was a 4-3 decision, it was overturned. I think that what we need to realize is that in the Constitution, it cannot be challenged by the trial court. I mean, the court cannot declare the Constitution unconstitutional. So,
well, actually, some courts have voided constitutional amendments. But what you're saying is this makes it safer or less likely?
It's less likely that a state court could overturn that.
Let me ask you about that New Jersey case that just happened, and we'll talk more about this. That state already had anti-discrimination laws in place as far back as 1992, protecting gays. And so the court was looking at those laws and saying, you know, we're gay people being treated as fairly as others. We don't have such anti-discrimination laws on our books. We have, as you saw, statutes that are pretty clearly drawn against gays marrying.
Right. You know, I'm not real familiar with the total context of the New Jersey law, other than that it was overturned by the Supreme Court after being upheld by both the trial court and the appeals court.
Now, Kim Beswick, we saw you in the piece, and you were emotional at one point. Explain a little bit more. You talked about being concerned that in a tragedy of some sort, HJR 2 would prevent your family from certain things. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. What we know about a marriage contract is that it comes with over 1,000 rights and protections. But I think just to be what I was trying to be more specific in that tape and say that the protections of marriage really are there to protect families when things do go wrong. They allow us to visit the ones that we love in the hospital. They allow us to get health benefits through our employers for our children and our partners. They allow us to have clear custody rights when somebody dies and fair taxation when somebody dies. And so, you know, although that there are some, I know that there are people who have traditional views of marriage, what we're really talking about here are some of the basic foundations that all families need in order to be protected and safe and secure when tragedy strikes.
Your partner Sarah mentioned the documents that you do carry, though. You have documents that stipulate certain things in the case of emergency. Is that not enough?
It's definitely not enough. So we have 5 documents. We have 2 wills. We have a guardianship agreement that says that when I die, I'd like to pass my children on to Sarah, who is their mother. And then we also have medical decision-making documents for both of us. So we have 5 documents, and you know, going through that process, for one, is very cumbersome. There's some expense associated with it, and certainly you have to have the knowledge. It's nothing that's automatic. You have to have the knowledge that you need to go out there and do these things in order to make that happen. But the reality is that that doesn't come close to covering the protections of marriage. It doesn't allow you health insurance through your employer. In terms of hospital visitation, the medical decision-making documents, as far as they've been explained to me, certainly allow me to make decisions for Sarah and vice versa if we were to be somehow incapacitated or unable to do that in the hospital, but they don't actually qualify us as family members when we go in the hospital to visit our loved ones. And so for that reason, we're not allowed to, for instance, ride in an ambulance on the way to the hospital or actually visit our partners in the emergency room. So, we've certainly done as much as we can to put these documents together, and that's very important that we do that to protect our family, but it really doesn't come close to covering us. The other issue with the documents is that they can be contested by blood relatives. And specifically with my will and my guardianship documents, what that means is that my wishes, if they were to be contested by an unagreeable family member, actually may not be upheld by the courts of Idaho. And so that's a risk, and it doesn't carry the same protections as a legal document would.
Brian Fisher, you're very supportive of this amendment. Why does this issue mean so much to you?
Well, I think fundamentally, Marcia, marriage is really about children, and it's about a society recognizing what environment provides the optimal nurturing environment for children, and deciding as a culture that this is going to be our public policy. We are going to protect and honor the relationship in which children are going to thrive and have the best opportunity for maximal nurture and maturation and growth. And that's clearly in a relationship in a home where they are raised by a mom and by a dad.
Why is that clear to you? Why do you feel that way?
Well, moms and dads are not interchangeable parts. Moms have something very unique and irreplaceable that they invest in the lives of young children, and dads have something unique and irreplaceable that they invest in the lives of children. Boys learn what it means to be a man by and a husband and a father from their dads. Girls learn what it means to be a woman and a wife and a mother from their moms, and they learn what it means for the sexes to relate to each other by observing their parents, and that modeling is priceless and it's irreplaceable.
So when you saw the piece that you were in as well with Kim and her partner, you would not call that an optimal parenting situation then?
Well, we have over 10,000 social studies of different family structures and experiences that have been done over the last several decades, and virtually without exception, they all confirm what our common sense tells us that kids need and deserve both a mom and a dad, and that there's something missing in their development. A lot of the social pathologies that we see in our culture right now can be traced to the absence of one or the other parent in the home.
Jim East?
We hear about all of these studies, and we have to look at who funds them, where do they come from. Oftentimes they're from conservative groups with an agenda. Second of all, most of those studies were not comparing same-sex parents versus heterosexual parents. They were considering single parents versus two-parent families. And I think we would all agree that two-parent families are better for children. And I would hate to do anything in our Constitution or in our government at all that would limit children like Kim's and Sarah's from having two parents and having the protection of having both parents in their home and having the security that comes with that.
A little bit about your background. You come from a conservative background, evangelical.
Yes.
And in fact, we're in the religious broadcasting industry.
I was.
Religious Broadcasting Station of the Year, is that correct?
That's right. 2001, National Religious Broadcasters honored us as their Station of the Year.
So many of the arguments sometimes for the amendment come down in religious terms. Mm-hmm. What is your response to that?
Well, it took me a long time as a person of faith who has a close relationship with my Savior to accept that everything I had heard all my life was not necessarily gospel. That God created me with gifts and abilities and sensitivities that are unique. And as a gay man, now in a relationship of 5 years, I am more whole and more healthy and more blessed than I could have ever been all those 20 plus years of trying to be something that I was never gifted to be.
Brian Fisher, you're a former pastor.
Yes, well, the scriptures on the second page of the Bible teach that marriage comes from God. He designed it. He created us as human beings. It's very clear that He created us male and female, that there's a sexual compatibility between male and female that cannot be reproduced in any other relationship, and that sexual compatibility is what creates the possibility of procreation, creates the possibility of conceiving children, carrying them to birth, bringing them into the world, and then raising them together as male and female, as man and woman, as husband and wife to maturity. And so if you see a same-sex couple that has children, you know that there is a missing biological parent somewhere in the mix.
Yeah, I would say that, Mr. Fisher referred to the optimal nurturing environment and having male and female role models. There are a lot of ways to introduce male and female role models to our children, and obviously my partner and I, as thoughtful parents, we live 2 doors down from one of their uncles. We live around people who are in married relationships, and they have a lot of opportunities to be exposed to both sexes and to have examples of both men and women and married people in their lives.
Before we go to some phone calls, Representative Denny, I want to come back to you in terms of policy here. Why add the words that marriage between a man and a woman should be the only domestic legal union? Those words. Doesn't that, first of all, stand to potentially affect heterosexual couples too? And then this is not kind of a term of art, this domestic legal union. Even the Attorney General's opinion that you got said, when you add words like this in, instead of a clean amendment that says marriage is between a man and a woman, you open yourself up potentially to more litigation. Why add those words?
Well, I think it does add that marriage is only between a man and a woman, and that there are other relationships that the state of Idaho will not recognize as a marriage, and I think that's...
Why did you want to do that and potentially broaden this amendment?
Well, I think the major reason is so that we do not extend marriage to these other relationships, the civil unions and domestic partnerships. And at the same time, however, we're not prohibiting those, as some have said. We are just saying that the state of Idaho will not recognize those as marriage.
Well, how will this work for units of government then? So, for instance, the city of Boise, the city of Troy may have anti-discrimination policies. Various universities, BSU, U of I, have maybe bereavement policies or even housing policies that allow extend benefits to same-sex couples. Since they're units of Idaho government, if this passes, will they have to stop doing what they're doing with those policies?
Well, that's up to interpretation, but I don't believe so. I think basically what it says is that the state of Idaho will not recognize these unions as marriage.
So you wouldn't give money then to the universities if they carried out policies that you felt were supportive of domestic legal unions? Well,
of course, that's a policy decision at the time, but I don't think that there would be any change in the way we give money to the universities.
Mr. Fisher, what is your rationale for having not just an amendment that says, marriage is between a man and a woman, as in other states, but expanding it to include all of these other domestic legal unions?
Well, again, we know from experience, and Jim referred to studies. Well, if you find studies that maybe say that same-sex parenting produces the same results in children, I think you have to ask the same questions that Jim asked about who's funding that and do those groups have an agenda. Because what we do discover, common sense tells us this, and virtually all the research that's been done over the last 3 or 4 decades confirms that children really need a mom and a dad, not two cohabiting parents, but what they need is a mom and dad who are married to each other. We look at even cohabiting couples, and cohabiting couples break up twice as frequently as married couples do. There's something preservative about a man and a woman taking that solemn vow in the presence of witnesses and in the presence of God that preserves their union together. The rates of sexual abuse and domestic abuse for children are much, much higher when they live in a home with an adult to whom they are not related by marriage. And so we don't want to regard those relationships as the moral or legal equivalent of marriage either, because we care about children and we want to be sure they've got the optimal nurturing environment.
The remarkable thing to me is how much we agree on commitment, marriage, fidelity, stable relationships, stable families. That's what this is about. And to deny that stability, to deny that kind of security to so many families, not just gay families, but straight families who for whatever reason are not able to get married, they are denied this stability, this security. Their children are then affected. Their communities are affected. And what happens in a neighborhood where there is a couple, gay or straight, that are not married, and everyone sees them living happily together? Doesn't that encourage a lack of commitment? Doesn't say, well, they don't need all these ties that bind and the responsibilities. It
Fisher,
undermines marriage.
What about this argument that this could encourage, by keeping gays in the shadow, not allowing them to make a commitment to each other, it can encourage more promiscuity, which is, I think, what you were kind of alluding to.
Well, again, I think what we want to do is we want to place the interests and needs of children ahead of the desires or the demands of adults.
And other than the rearing, you were talking about they need an optimal rearing atmosphere, is there another fear there of having gays in the household with children?
No, we just want to be sure that children have the optimal nurturing environment, and we know what that is. It's with a mom and with a dad, and therefore we should not regard any other union as the moral or legal equivalent of marriage between a man and a woman. And see, if you take Jim's argument that the only thing that you need to justify calling something a marriage is love and affection, well, then the question that we really need to ask is, okay, where do you stop? I mean, why not, if you have one man and two women that love each other, why can't they be married? Two men and two women,
of course, we have laws on the books about polygamy.
Yeah, but the question is, why? If the justification for marriage has nothing to do with children, if it's just love and affection, then where, logically and rationally, do you draw the line? And I would suggest there's no place to stop.
Let's take some calls. Mark in Middleton. Mark, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just had a real quick comment. My comment is the sex organs were designed by the God of nature to procreate and nothing else. So the whole homosexual lifestyle is simply wrong and in every way unhealthy. And, they don't even love each other, really. That's not the correct word to use because it goes against nature.
Okay, let's get a comment. Many court cases actually have, including liberal states like Washington, have come down on the side that marriage is, the main value of it is for procreation.
Well, I would say that there are many people who are married who are not married for that reason, who choose not to have kids, who are not able to have kids, who have already had kids and are now in their second or third marriage. And so what we know about marriage in our culture is that it's much more diverse than that. When you go down to the courthouse, all you need is $75 and a driver's license to get married. There's no parenting quiz. There's no test for mental stability. There's no test with regards to records of domestic violence. There's no test to see if you've abused drugs or alcohol or whether you would be a good partner or a good parent. There is no test. There is no litmus test to marriage. And the state of Idaho treats anybody who walks into that office the same, whether it's their first marriage or their fifth.
Now, you have children and you carried them, but you are their biological mother.
That's true.
So you procreated in a sense, although not with your partner.
That's correct, and many couples are in the same situation. I mean, this is the same wonderful technology that many married couples use as well to have children.
What about that? Now with in vitro fertilization and sperm banks and everything, you can still have a child but not be married to the person that you had the child with.
Well, there's just simply no way to replace a father presence in the home. Males are designed to be far more than just sperm donors. That's where the process of procreation begins. But they have then the opportunity, privilege, and responsibility to be a presence in that child's life until that child reaches maturity and then beyond. And if a child doesn't have that father presence in the home, or if it's the other direction, doesn't have the benefit of the mother presence in the home, there is just no way around the fact that there is going to be a deficit in the life of that child. That's why when married couples get into trouble, they will try to keep that marriage together, often just for the sake of the children, because they know the hardship it'll be on the children to be missing a mom or a dad in the home.
I guess I'd like to make a point here, because if Mr. Fisher truly believes that my children are at a disadvantage, then why put them in a position where they're even more at a disadvantage by having no rights, no protections, no access to medical care, no access to fair custody rights and clear custody rights with regards to their parents? Why actually penalize them and take that a step further and put them in greater risk than they are today? I think that this is really about, it's not about whether these families exist the fact is there's thousands of couples and children of couples in Idaho, and I think the question is, how exactly as a culture are we going to treat those couples, and how are we going to treat those children?
Well, and Kim, has made this comment a number of times, but she's simply in error when she says that the rights that she's talking about cannot be obtained very easily using legal forms often that are available for free on the internet. She's indicated she and her partner have been able to make those kind of binding legal arrangements. I went on the Attorney General's website at 7:16 the other morning, and by 7:19 I had downloaded for free a form off the Attorney General of Idaho's website that enables anyone to establish a living will and grant durable power of attorneys for medical decisions to anyone they choose.
Jim, briefly, and then I'll go back to the phone lines.
There is no document available that will give you the right to Social Security benefits. If Sarah dies, your children would not get Social Security benefits. If someone has a relationship of 10, 20, 30 years and their partner is killed by a drunk driver, there's no document that gives you the right for a wrongful death lawsuit. There are so many things that people take for granted in committed, loving relationships and families that are not available by those documents.
And you had an experience in a hospital, is that right?
Well, on a personal level, yes. 2 years ago, my partner David had a serious neck injury. We had durable powers of attorney in hand. The hospital administrator said, "I'm sorry, Jim cannot be with you in the emergency room." That was the real reality. The paperwork can be contested. It can be argued. It does not guarantee you anything in the moment of crisis and in the moment where it is needed most.
Let's take another call. Dino in Idaho Falls. Dino, go ahead, please.
Yes. Strangely enough, I've always thought that divorce and domestic abuse were very threatening to marriage, so I'd like to know, how does gay marriage really threaten traditional marriage? And secondly, I'd like to read, it's in plain English in our voter's guide, and it is a voter's guide that tells us what the amendments and resolutions are in plain English as well as legalese. And it says here, a yes vote on HJR 2 says here that the state and local governments could not recognize civil unions, domestic partnerships, or any other relationships that attempt to approximate marriage, nor could they grant any of the legal benefits of marriage to any relationships that attempt to approximate marriage. I know this counters the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, so I'd like to know how those two gentlemen are going to handle that.
Thank you very much. First, on the issue of how do you feel that a gay relationship threatens people in other relationships? And I think I have an email about this as well. Shane from Eagle wrote in. He says, whether or not two consenting adults want to make a commitment to live together and love each other as a married couple does not affect my day-to-day life or in any way weaken the vows or take away the rights of married heterosexual couples.
Well, certainly those relationships I don't think threaten traditional marriage. However, I think just the simple fact that they want to call those relationships marriage, and I think that lessens the value of marriage, and so I think that's how marriage is threatened by that.
If they wanted to call it civil union, would that be a better term then instead of marriage?
Well, I think the way this is written, they still could not be called marriage or recognized as a marriage or receive the benefits of marriage.
What about her second question, which goes back to the question I asked you, which is units of government and how this would stand to affect those units if a particular city or county wanted to make their own decision about this?
Well, I just did read the statement of purpose on this, and it says that it is intended to prohibit the recognition of the state of Idaho and the or any political subdivision. So I think that it would affect, changing my original statement on that, I think that it would prohibit the recognition of those local units.
And Representative, how might this affect businesses? I'm maybe speaking out of turn. I apologize if I am, but maybe I understood that Wells Fargo, Hewlett-Packard, some other businesses have policies that are extended to same-sex couples in terms of health care and bereavement policies, family leave. If they're doing business in the state of Idaho and they have these policies, would it affect those businesses as well?
It would not affect the businesses. They could still make their business decisions based on how they want to treat those relationships.
You know, that's true, but I also believe that it does affect businesses in a different way, in the sense that it puts a black mark on Idaho. It paints Idaho as somewhat backwards and regressive versus progressive. It hurts people. I've worked for both Hewlett-Packard, and now I'm in a small tech startup company. It prevents us from recruiting the type of global talent that we need to run our businesses, because it offends people, both gay and straight, who look at these policies and don't feel like they're in line with really where the country is going.
Do you think this would keep businesses from locating here?
Absolutely not. 45 states right now have laws on the books that define marriage as the union of one man and one woman. If Kim's thesis is correct, there's only 5 friendly states in the country for business, and that cannot possibly be true. You know, and I would suggest, you know, and 20 states have amended their constitutions to place this definition in their constitutions. Those amendments have passed by an average of 71%, which tells us that's the mainstream view. This is not a fringe, extreme, right-wing view. This is the view of mainstream America, that marriage ought to be, and that term ought to be reserved for the union of one man and one woman.
But no other state in the Union, out of all 50 states, no other state has a statute or a constitutional amendment that is as strong and as punitive as this one.
Well,
to label any domestic legal union stretches so far that no one can form any kind of civil domestic partnership that would have any of the benefits, the rights, the responsibilities that we've been talking about here tonight.
Well, Jim's simply an error on that. Of the 20 amendments that have been passed, 12 of them have language that accomplishes the same thing that our amendment do. So 12 of the 20 states have already placed a similar definition in their constitution, and there are 8 states that are considering them next Tuesday, and 7 of the 8 amendments have language that's very similar to Idaho's.
Let's take another call. Scott in Boise. Scott, go ahead, please.
Well, I don't understand why this is even an issue. I work for a living, and I'm married to a very fine woman, and we have vows, and they're between us and God. It seems to me we have a lot more issues to resolve, issues with the environment, issues with unemployment, issues with hungry people. Why are you guys even messing around with this?
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You know, some have opined in editorials that the reason that these were put on the ballot is, you know, and not just here, is that it's maybe a tough year for conservatives and Republicans nationally, and that these type of measures would draw people, conservatives, to the polls and help conservative candidates.
Well, you know, I think that's an error. We've tried this, I think, for 3 years, and it's finally, or I think it's 3 years, and it's finally on the ballot this time, and certainly it may draw out a conservative vote. However, I don't know that that's going to make any difference this year.
What about his contention that there are far bigger issues for the legislature to be dealing with, and this did cost, I think, $50,000 to put on the ballot? What about that issue?
You know, I disagree that this is not a big issue. This is a very big issue. I think this goes to the very moral fiber of our society. I think there's a quote in our Constitution, and if I could find it, I might read it to you. I will find that, Marcia, and read it to you later. But basically, what it says is in our Article 24, Section 3, that the first responsibility of all good government is to protect or promote the temperance and morality of the citizens.
When the House State Affairs Committee heard the debate on this issue before voting on it, they heard 3 hours of testimony. They then took a break for 15 minutes so they could come back and have a 3-minute vote on the issue. The reason they took that 15-minute vote, and I was there, I watched this happen, they invited House Speaker Bruce Newcomb to come into the chamber so that he could sit on the front row and watch each of those legislators as they voted. There was a clear pressure put on those legislators by the Speaker of the House to vote in a certain manner. You saw it happen. There was no reason to take that break. The vote lasted 3 minutes, but it was clear that there was pressure being applied.
I had an interesting story to go along with it, which is that my partner actually testified in that to that committee, and as she came out and was in the elevator with one of the committee members who said directly to her, "I did not vote my conscience today." And of course I won't mention that person's name, but you know, it was clear pressure, election year politics, election year issues. And the other issue is that, the 5 senators changed their mind from last year to this year, going from a non-election year to election year, and clearly there's pressures. This is a very divisive issue. It's an issue like abortion and others that our policymakers don't want to take stands on because it's not beneficial to them getting elected, whatever they say about the issue.
I want to roll to some tape, actually, now that you're talking about testimony on the floor. This is testimony on the Senate floor from 2 senators on opposing sides of this issue.
If you look to the future in 50 years, if things change as much as they have in the last 50 years, what will we have? We have AIDS rampant throughout the world, and they don't come from solid marriages and a solid home. That comes from another way of life. I hope that you'll vote for this amendment, and that one of the most sacred things that we have, the marriage between a man and a woman.
The Civil Rights Act was placed in front of the people. Would they have voted for that? You tell me. Do you think that they would have voted for the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s and the 1970s? I can tell you around the groups that I was around, the answer is no. How many of you in this room consider females inferior? How many of you consider African Americans inferior? Latinos, anyone of color, Samoans? Don't raise your hand. My point is, you don't consider any of those folks inferior. Back then, we did. 20 years from now, what is our conversation going to be?
And Brian Fisher, let's take the first quote first from Senator Burton Shaw about AIDS. Is this a concern for you as well?
Well, I think it should be for our entire culture. One of the reasons why we should not grant same-sex unions the same status that we do heterosexual marriage is because of the health risks that are associated with the homosexual lifestyle. And according to the Centers for Disease Control, which is not one of the conservative right-wing religious organizations that Jim mentioned ago, it's a federal agency, it has no political axe to grind. And according to the Centers for Disease Control, 48% of the AIDS patients today in the United States contracted AIDS through men having sex with men. They comprise about 3% of the population. 48% of the AIDS patients, another 25% contracted AIDS through intravenous drug abuse. So this indicates that the homosexual lifestyle has the same kind of health risks, in fact more severe health risks associated with it even than intravenous drug use, and we simply should not endorse that lifestyle simply for health reasons.
If you're concerned about health, then you would want to encourage healthy, committed, faithful relationships and discourage promiscuity. By not allowing there to be any kind of civil recognition of relationships, you discourage that commitment and you encourage promiscuity. The very reason that we want to prevent AIDS, we want to prevent health crises, we should be encouraging commitment in relationships and not discouraging it in the state.
And I'd like to say too, I mean, AIDS risk is not a litmus test for marriage, and if we are going to make it a litmus test for marriage, then let's apply it equally to straight couples, to gay couples, to men, to women, to everybody. Because I know that specifically with regards to the Center for Disease Control, I am not a health risk in the relationship that I am in now, and I certainly know people on both sides of the fence who could potentially be health risks. So is that the litmus test that we're talking about here? Because I think what we're really talking about is whether we give a group of people in our society the opportunity to talk to the legislature in the future about some basic protections and rights for their families. And right now, as far as I know, there are no litmus tests for marriage.
Well, I think one of the things we want to do, again, is we want to have policies that relate to sexuality and family that are best for the citizens. And we know that reserving sex exclusively for marriage and then remaining faithful in marriage is a 100% guarantee that you will not contract a sexually transmitted disease. So it simply makes sense for our legislators in trying to protect the health of our citizens to provide the maximum endorsement for those relationships that have proven over time in history, medically and otherwise, to be the healthiest and safest for our citizens.
You know, some have said, Mr. Fisher and Mr. Denny, that that these types of amendments are social policy. Perhaps they belong in statute, but as far as constitutions go, that constitutions are not meant to set social policy, that they're meant to set rules of governance and, in fact, secure for individual citizens the rights against the power of the government. Some have said that if these types of amendments continue across the country, whether it's on this issue or some other social issue, that the Constitution will be, quote, pockmarked with social agendas.
Well, go ahead, Lawrence.
Well, you know, I think that the main reason that this needs to be put in the Constitution is because of the court system of today and the activist judges who are not interpreting the law. I think our law is fairly specific, and if it were not for the courts, I think that our law would be very sufficient. However, the courts are, I think, legislating from the bench. Consequently, I think that this needs to be elevated to the protection of the Constitution.
And one more question for you before we go back to the phone lines. There was the New Jersey decision you mentioned, which is some gay people are looking at as a success, others are kind of wondering about it. But in New York, in California, in Washington State, traditionally liberal states, the last decisions that have come down on this issue have been against same-sex marriage. They have not been successes for the gay community.
Well, in fact, in the Washington Supreme Court decision, the majority there took the unusual step of rebuking a dissenting judge by name for calling people who believe in natural marriage bigots.
But at the same time, the decision went against same-sex marriage.
But their point was there's nothing bigoted or discriminatory about establishing social policy that is best for a society's children.
That is correct. They said that marriage was for procreation.
And I do think maybe
decision.
we're seeing activist judges maybe step back just a little, because we had 9 decisions in a row that upheld the traditional definition of marriage and upheld state law.
Yeah, I'd really like to disagree with that.
Go ahead.
The polls across the country show strong endorsement across the country for civil unions and domestic partnerships. And so the reasons why Massachusetts and New Jersey and Vermont, who are more liberal states, are starting to come up with policies and decisions from the judiciary that support that is because the people support that as a majority view as well. And so this isn't about judges doing something that's out of step with the people of those states. It's about judges doing something that actually is in step with the people of those states. So it's not about marriage, and I think regardless of what you feel about marriage, this is about the potential for civil unions and domestic partnerships, which HJR2 rules out as an option for Idaho.
Well, and I would suggest that the only polls that count are the ones that are taken at the ballot box, and 71% of Americans take a different view than Kim does.
They certainly have on the issue of marriage.
When they have an opportunity to vote.
I think you're talking about the polls where people just asked about the word civil union. There's this interesting situation where people, and I think in Colorado, this will be interesting to watch because Colorado has both on its ballot.
Yeah, and
both a prohibition of same-sex marriage, but then also allowing civil unions. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
The 71% is very outdated, and the recent polls on the support of marriage itself, not just civil unions, is split right down the middle, 51 to 49%. It's literally right down the middle now across the country, so that's out of date.
I want to get some more calls in. Denisa in Boise. Denisa, go ahead, please.
Thank you. My question is for Brian Fisher, and my question is this. Is it true that gays can no longer petition the government if HJR2 is passed on November 7th?
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, did you
She
repeat
wants
the
to
question?
know if this will prevent gay people from petitioning the government for, say, same-sex benefits or things short of a marriage, if this passes because of the words domestic legal union in there.
Yeah, and that's another bogus argument that opponents have used. They do not give up the right to petition the legislature. You know, as Representative Denny pointed out, the pro-family community, we petitioned the legislature for 2 years in a row and were denied. We had to petition the legislature a 3rd year in order to see this move forward. So the right to petition the legislature is not the same thing as the right to get what you want. And They will have the same access to the political process on November 8th that they do on November 7th. And if they'd like to start a repeal effort to undo this, then they are certainly welcome. Nobody will stop them from trying.
But we will not have access to approach our legislator for the right to hospital visitation, to insurance, to inheritance. All of those will now be unconstitutional under the laws and under the Constitution of Idaho. So we will be shut out of the legislative process. We will be shut out of the right to and the ability to approach our legislator. When we go to them, the only thing they can say is, I'm sorry, that's now unconstitutional in Idaho. And so it does shut us out of the process. Yeah. You're right, we could go back and get a constitutional amendment, but that would again require 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and over half of the voters in Idaho. That takes a long, cumbersome process. That's why this is being put before the voters, because they know how difficult it is and how permanent it is and how punitive it is.
And Mr. Denning wanted to say something.
It is not going to be unconstitutional. What it is say, if you'll read the amendment, it says that we do not recognize that as marriage. You can still have those civil unions, you can still have those domestic partnerships.
It says no other domestic legal union in there.
What about that phrasing that says no other domestic legal union?
It is a blanket, broad statement.
It will not be recognized as marriage, as an equivalent of marriage.
In other words, Representative Denning's point is that they still will be able to have the kind of private relationships that they want. Nobody's going to stop them from doing that. Nobody's going to prevent them from entering into the private relationships.
But it wouldn't be put in Idaho code, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it says
but nobody would stop them from doing it. And you know what we've heard frequently from people in the homosexual community is what really matters is love and commitment, and no law can enforce that or preserve that. If that's true, then there's no reason why they cannot continue to maintain their fidelity to each other. If it's a matter of the heart, if that's really where it's rooted, then they should be able to maintain the fidelity in their private relationships without having to have the protection of law, recognition of
I have a close friend who is a pastor, and he often says that the most important part of a wedding ceremony, when he's performing a wedding for a couple, has little to do with what he says to the couple. It's when he turns to the congregation and says, will you support these two in this relationship? The thing about marriage, civil unions, domestic partnerships, or any kind of recognition is that it brings the community together to say we support these two in their commitment to one another, and we want to help them succeed in their relationship. Lord knows, in any marriage, in any relationship, there are trials and struggles. We should be encouraging, as a society, commitment and fidelity in a relationship, not discouraging it.
And Marcia, I would just say that it's perfectly possible for gay couples to have a religious ceremony in a church if they would like. There are a number of clergy in our area that will perform that. So if that's the kind of experience they would like, to have a religious ceremony and have the guests there show their support for them, there's nothing that stops them from doing that.
In fact, you are having a commitment ceremony in a couple of days, are you not?
That's right. That's right.
You know,
but there's nothing in that ceremony that will have any legal weight. So society, while we have our circle of friends and our loved ones that will be there, society, if this vote goes the way some folks hope it will be saying to us, we don't want to support your relationship. We don't want you to be in a committed, faithful relationship with one another. That's a horrible thing to say to anybody.
I've got to take some more phone calls. We want to hear from people. Alice in Boise. Alice, go ahead, please.
Yes, this is Alice, and I been on hold so long I forget my question. No, not really. I wanted to ask Brian Fisher if the only appropriate environment to raise children is one man and one woman, then what does he propose that we do with the over 50% of heterosexual marriages that fail and end up in divorce, and the children end up with only one parent anyway, or in the tragic situation where a parent dies and they are left, quote unquote, alone to raise children on their own. I think what Kim said and what Jim said is true, that we can always find a community of faithful, loving people to help us raise children. But the most important thing is two healthy, whole parents bringing up healthy, whole children. And it doesn't matter what sex they are. And I would like to say I've been happily married for 25 years, and if either Kim and her partner and Jim and his partner had children, I would be honored to be their grandparents.
Thank you for your call.
Well, and I think that's an excellent question and a comment. You know, we really have virtually a social catastrophe with our divorce rate in our country, and I don't know that there's anybody in our nation that thinks that's a good thing, that likes that thinks that's the best for either the adults or the children that are involved. And so I think there are probably things that can be done at the public policy level. You know, right now it's easier to get out of a marriage than out of a car lease. And you know, we probably ought to do something to encourage couples to recognize the serious nature of that commitment, in order to encourage couples to stay together, because children are the one that pay the price. We've had 30 years now to evaluate the effect of no-fault divorce, and what we're seeing that kids that grow up in divorced homes, their academic performance is lower, their ability to generate income is lower, and their ability to sustain lasting relationships has been affected by divorce. So we want to tackle that problem from a public policy level as well as from a faith community standpoint.
You're talking about children a lot. Do you believe, either of you, that gay people should be allowed to adopt children?
Well, again, I think what we want to do, and I'll have Representative Denny comment, but I do think that what we want to do is we want to look at an issue like that from the standpoint of what is in the best interest of children.
What do you think?
Well, what's in the best interest of children is that they be raised by a mom and by a dad. If you have a child that needs to be put up for adoption for some reason, that child has already experienced some kind of trauma to even be in that position. The last thing we want, the best thing we want to do for them is to put them in the optimal nurturing environment, and we know what that is with a mom and a dad.
Do you foresee down the road, if this passes, that the state adoption laws would need to be changed, or would that be the next step to restrict gay people from adopting, single gay people? Right now you have to have a spouse to adopt, but a single gay person, would you see that as?
I don't know that you do have to have a partner to adopt right now.
Single
I
parents
think
or
single
parents
parents
can adopt.
But you know, I don't know what the end result might be.
Would you favor that, preventing gay people from adopting?
You know, I really don't have a position on it yet, but as Brian said, I think the optimal environment is for a mother and a father.
Heaven forbid that we ever go to that extreme. We have enough children being shuffled from foster home to foster home now. Better that they be raised in a two-parent family, whether it's a gay family or a straight family, that they be raised where they're taught responsibility, good citizenship, good stewardship of their funds, to be good, accountable, responsible citizens. That's what's important. Two parents make a better family.
Yeah, this whole conversation is about some optimal view of the optimal situation according to, two people who are sitting here next to me as to how children should be raised. But the reality is that our society contains a great diversity of situations in terms of how kids are raised. And again, the question here is, how are we going to support all the children in our culture? How are we going to support the children of both heterosexual marriages, of broken marriages, and also of same-sex couples and the commitments that we make? How are we going to support those children? If you want to protect children, the best thing to do is to vote no and let the children of same-sex couples and families be able to get the same rights, or at least a few of the most basic rights that heterosexuals have today.
Well, let me ask you, the second comment from the senator, which we didn't talk much about, he talked about civil rights, that this is an issue of civil rights, just the way rights for African Americans or women were. Do you see it the same way?
Idahoans are fair people. They want fairness for all Idahoans. And they want to see that folks are not shut out of the legislative process. They want to see that children are taken care of. They want to see that if folks build a home together and share their lives together, they can inherit their home, their pensions, that they can have the rights that we look at as and take for granted that are not available to many Idahoans right now.
Brian Fisher, the end of the senator's comment was 20 years from now, when we look at this, will we feel the same way we did in terms of how we had treated African Americans?
Well, see, the essential issue there with civil rights legislation is that civil rights legislation historically and correctly has been reserved for immutable characteristics. Someone who is born African American will be African American until the day they die. There's no proof that homosexuals are born that way. Even gay researchers who are motivated to find a gay gene have not been able to identify a gay gene yet. And many in the African American community, are some of the leading opponents of the normalization of homosexual behavior, like Alveda King, who was the niece of Martin Luther King Jr. She is opposed to the normalization of homosexual behavior. 59% of the African American community in Michigan voted for maximum protection.
Let me get a response before we
marriage.
go back to the phones about a choice versus.
Well, and yet Coretta Scott King supported same-sex parenting and same-sex families. So you can't go there. we care about families. We care about justice for everybody. We want everyone to have equal access to the law and to the benefits of the support of society for their families. We want to encourage commitment to one another, and we want to encourage a just and fair relationship for everyone. If the civil rights movement was about that, I don't know what causes being gay. That is, you're absolutely right. That is been debated, and there are many theories out there, and I wouldn't try to hazard a guess. I know that for 20 plus years I tried not to be. I went through ex-gay therapy. I don't think someone can change their orientation. Now, there'll be people who will disagree with me on that. I could change my behavior. I could say I'm going to live alone and not in a relationship and not be in commitment and not have any intimacy in my life. But what kind of horrible existence is that to say to someone, we don't want you to have love and intimacy and wholeness in your life and in your relationship?
I'm going to take one more call. Jan in Caldwell. Jan, go ahead, but if you could be brief, that'd be great.
Okay, my concern is probably directed to Reverend Fisher. I'm concerned about, I know of a number of cases of the father, mother, even a grandparent that came out. They were in a family situation that was supposed to be a married couple, the traditional married couple, and it was basically all a lie, and they had children and they were involved. Also, a short question on
We're going to have to cut you off. Her point is that there are people who are gay, who are married in a quote, quote, traditional marriage, who are, I guess, living a lie in some sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that can happen, but the reality is that people can change their sexual orientation. Dr. Robert Spitzer led the charge in 1973 to have homosexuality removed from the list of mental disorders because he believed at that time it was an inborn characteristic, but in 2003, he's a professor at Columbia University, not a member of the religious right wing. He acknowledged that people who are motivated, get enough help, they can change their sexual orientation.
I'll give you a short response.
Yeah, this isn't about whether people are gay or not. The fact is that they are. They are in Idaho. There's thousands of people and families in Idaho who are gay and living families. And the American Association of Pediatrics, the American Bar Association, the American Academy of Family Physicians, the Child Welfare League, all the organizations that are surrounding families that protect them, whether it's medical or social, all advocate rights for same-sex couples and for gay parents.
We've got 1 minute left. Representative Denny, you are one of the sponsors of this legislation. I'm going to give you the first 30 seconds to tell people why you think they should vote for it.
Well, you know, I think that marriage is one of the cornerstones of our society, and I think that protecting marriage is one of the highest values that we can have. And I think that people should vote for HJR 2 to protect this cornerstone of the family and protect families in Idaho.
And Jim?
I would encourage folks to vote no because this amendment will hurt marriage, it will hurt families, it will hurt children, and it will have a long-lasting punitive effect on families and relationships and marriages in Idaho. And Idahoans are too fair-minded to see that happen. So regardless of what you think about marriage, I would say please vote no on this amendment.
You have been listening to a discussion on HJR 2, that's the proposed constitutional amendment on the ballot to define marriage. If you would like more information, including links to the text of the amendment, links to Mr. Fisher's group, links to Idaho Votes No, please visit our website at idahoptv.org. I'd like to thank my guests for coming in this evening for this program. And as usual, I'd like to thank you, our viewers of Dialogue, for tuning in. We hope you'll join us next week. Good night.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web